Support us with a subscription. The stories will come more often. Enjoy watching. At the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, Gary's cheating wife snuck off to a sleazy motel party, leaving him sick in bed. What she didn't know? Her secret was no longer safe, and Gary was about to blow up her double life with one perfectly orchestrated plan that would leave the whole town talking. Gary Thompson had spent most of his adult life believing he was one of the lucky ones. Married young to a woman he adored, raising two kids in a quiet Michigan town, holding down a stable job, and tinkering with his beloved '67 Mustang in his free time. It was a good life. Not flashy, not perfect, but solid. At least that's what he thought. Carol had always been unpredictable, but in a way that made Gary feel alive. She was fiery, witty, the kind of woman who made you feel like you won the lottery just for being in her orbit. They had chemistry, history, and the kind of intimacy that didn't need much effort to reignite, or so he believed. New Year's Eve was always their thing. It was tradition. Silly hats, dancing in the living room, the kids passed out before midnight. Carol used to wrap her arms around him like she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. But lately things had shifted. Carol had become distracted. She laughed less, touched him less. Conversations became transactional. Affection felt like a performance. Still, Gary chalked it up to age, maybe hormones. He didn't want to be the paranoid husband who accused his wife of cheating because she didn't jump his bones every other night. They were older now, and maybe this was just marriage settling into its next chapter. Then came the encounter that changed everything. It was a random day in early December when Gary ran into Misty Clark at the grocery store. She looked different, quieter, sharper around the edges. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She asked how he was holding up. When he asked what she meant, she simply said, "Give it time. It gets better." Then she walked away, leaving him confused and uneasy. That night, Gary told Carol he'd bumped into Misty. Her reaction was instant. Tense shoulders, sudden fatigue, fake yawns. "Stay away from her," Carol had snapped. "She's not right in the head." The warning was too strong, too rehearsed. Gary began noticing other things. Whispered calls with her best friend Ella that stopped the moment he entered the room. Long showers with her phone perched on the sink. A sudden need to work part-time again, even though their finances didn't require it. At first, Gary tried to ignore it, but a man can only pretend not to see for so long. One night, working late in the garage, he accidentally picked up the extension while Carol was on the phone. It wasn't just casual gossip. She and Ella were panicking, talking about someone named Misty breaking some kind of agreement and how they had to keep Gary in the dark. Something inside him snapped. He stayed quiet, hung up. And from that moment on, Gary stopped being the clueless husband and started being the investigator. He didn't yell, didn't confront, he observed. He learned that Misty and Steve Clark had quietly divorced last year, using an out-of-town lawyer to avoid local gossip. He learned that Carol and Steve had been seen at parties together, exclusive ones, invite only. Not the kind where people brought casseroles and played board games. The kind that involved locked bedrooms and open secrets. A discreet conversation with their neighbors, Chris and Emily, confirmed his worst fear. Carol had lied. She had joined a local swinger group without his knowledge, pretending Gary had given permission. She had even signed forms on his behalf. And Misty? She had been Steve's wife, the one betrayed, the one who never approved. Carol had helped destroy her marriage. That was the night Gary stopped loving Carol and started planning his revenge. Not the reckless, rage-fueled kind. Gary wasn't a violent man, but he was meticulous, methodical. If Carol wanted to live a double life, he would expose every secret, every lie, and do it in a way she would never see coming. Gary didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed the truth and patience. New Year's Eve was coming, and Carol had plans she thought Gary didn't know about. But Gary knew everything, and this year, she wouldn't be the only one making a move. Once Gary had confirmation that Carol had betrayed him, he entered a different mode. Not anger, not grief, precision. He started with what he could control, surveillance. Over the next week, while pretending everything was fine, Gary quietly bought a few small security cameras and audio recorders. Nothing fancy, just enough to monitor their home. One device went in the living room, another near the landline phone. Carol rarely used her cell phone at home. Gary had always joked about her being old school. Now it worked in his favor. He also installed a small camera in the garage, his sanctuary, just in case Carol ever stepped out to make a call or have a private moment. She never did, but it gave him peace of mind. The first few days yielded nothing. Then came a call from Ella. Gary, pretending to be half asleep, listened from the garage extension. Ella was pushing Carol hard to attend a New Year's Eve party. Carol hesitated, saying Gary was probably too sick to go anywhere, and she couldn't leave him alone. Ella was persistent, assuring her it was just one last time. She even named the guest list: Fred, Barney, Larry, Curly, and someone referred to as Sheem. That call changed everything. These weren't just random men. Gary recognized the names. Fred was a divorced Little League coach. Barney had once worked with Carol on a hospital fundraiser. Larry and Curly were brothers who ran a landscaping business. Gary had spoken with all of them at one point or another, never suspecting a thing. The betrayal cut deeper with every detail. Instead of confronting Carol, Gary expanded his operation. He pretended to go to work, but instead spent the day visiting neighbors, making casual inquiries. At Chris and Emily's house, he finally got the full story. Carol had approached their group under false pretenses, claiming Gary had agreed to everything. She even showed them a forged form with his signature. When Steve's wife, Misty, found out, she filed for divorce and named Carol in the case. That had been the beginning of the end for Steve. He lost the house, half his savings, and had to pay alimony for years. The group had quietly banned both Steve and Carol, but the damage was already done. Emily admitted that Carol had still been seeing some of the men from the group, but unofficially, and mostly at Ella's place. "It's more about chaos than pleasure at this point," Emily said. "Your wife, she's spiraling." Gary thanked them and left, burning inside. He tracked down Fred next, caught him as he was getting into his truck after work. The man looked terrified when Gary grabbed his arm. "You going to the party?" Gary asked. Fred stammered, then admitted he had attended a couple in the past. "It wasn't about Carol," he said. "Ella runs the show. Your wife, she just needed variety." Fred begged him not to go public, mentioning his coaching job. Gary offered him a deal: stay quiet, feed him intel, and disappear before the party kicks off. Fred agreed. Barney was next. He wasn't as easy. Gary found him outside the supply store. One punch in, Barney fought back, but Gary had the advantage. After a brief scuffle, Barney admitted he'd been with Carol once, twice max. "It meant nothing," he insisted, "just an impulse." Gary asked him why he was leaving town. Barney shrugged. "Because I'll never look you in the eye again. Because I messed up." Gary wasn't expecting that level of honesty. He didn't forgive him, but he offered the same deal. Stay away from the party, provide intel, and don't warn Carol. Then came Steve. Gary tracked him down at a low-rent apartment complex. He threatened to go public unless Steve talked. Steve folded fast. "It was Carol," he said. "She approached me. She said you were okay with it. I believed her." Gary beat him until he stopped moving, then sat and waited until Steve regained consciousness. "You'll tell her nothing," Gary said. "Not a word. You'll pretend everything's fine, or I'll ruin you." Steve nodded. By now, Gary had all the information he needed. He knew who'd be at the party, what time, where it would take place. He also knew Carol was hesitating, still worried about her marriage, maybe even feeling guilty. That's when he brought Misty in. She was reluctant at first. Her divorce had cost her everything, and she didn't want more drama. But when Gary explained what Carol had done, how she'd lied to everyone and manipulated Misty's life too, something shifted. "Let's end this," Misty said. The plan was simple: bait Carol into going to the party, get her caught in the act, and let the fallout destroy what was left of her secret life. Misty contacted a few women who'd been burned by the same group. They were eager to help. Some had suspected their husbands of cheating for years. Now they had proof. Gary would pretend to be sick. Carol would pretend to care. Then she'd sneak out, thinking she had everything under control. But this time, Gary was the one holding the cards. Everything was in motion, and New Year's Eve was just days away. New Year's Eve arrived, cold and gray. Gary started the day pretending to be sick. He wrapped a heating pad under his shirt, faked chills, and made sure to look as drained as possible. Carol checked on him throughout the morning, clearly watching for signs that he might get better or worse. He played the role perfectly. By the afternoon, she had started making calls. Gary, from the garage where his hidden monitors played softly, listened as she spoke with Ella. "I don't know," Carol whispered. "He looks awful. He might need me here." "You're not his nurse," Ella said flatly. "You deserve to have some fun. It's just one night." "Just one more," Carol echoed, like she was convincing herself. "Exactly," Ella said. "You'll be home before midnight. He'll sleep through the whole thing." Gary smiled at that. Carol was still trying to balance her double life. She wanted to cheat without getting caught. She wanted to sin and still be seen as the saint. But tonight, Gary wasn't going to sleep through anything. That evening, Carol brought him soup and flu pills, the same kind she'd taken when she was sick. He pretended to swallow them, then spit them into a napkin as soon as she turned her back. Minutes later, he faked falling asleep. Carol watched him for a long moment before quietly getting ready to leave. No goodbye, no kiss. Just silence and the soft click of the front door. Gary waited 5 minutes, then sat up and checked his phone. The recorder app was still running. Misty was already in position, parked near the motel where the so-called party was taking place. 2 other women were nearby, waiting in unmarked cars. All had been cheated on by men involved in this group. All were ready to confront the truth and the people who had helped destroy their families. Carol arrived at the motel just before 8 p.m. She wasn't alone for long. Ella greeted her at the door, already hyped up. Inside, things were quiet, just some drinks, snacks, and tension. Carol was clearly uncomfortable, but not enough to leave. Mo and Sham arrived next, then Larry and Curly. Everyone was pretending it was just a party. No one called it what it really was, but everyone knew. Then, chaos. At 8:45 p.m., the door burst open. 4 women entered, fast and furious. Misty was among them. So was a woman named Janet, whose husband had been with Ella. The other 2 were equally determined. No one said anything at first, then yelling, accusations, swearing. Ella tried to run but was pulled down. Carol froze, eyes wide. Larry and Curly backed away, caught off guard. Someone shouted about a camera. That got everyone's attention. One of the women had brought a handheld recorder, filming everything for legal evidence. Another called the cops. Carol tried to talk her way out, insisting she was just there for a drink, that she hadn't done anything. But it was too late. The police arrived within minutes. Officers entered, quickly separating people. Those who fought were cuffed. Others were questioned. Gary didn't show up. He didn't need to. He already had what he wanted. Proof. Carol was arrested along with Ella. The charges weren't for cheating. That wasn't illegal. But public indecency, lewd behavior in a non-zoned area, and violating local nuisance laws were enough. The DA had recently made a campaign promise to crack down on underground immorality. This was his perfect case. At the police station, Carol sat in a holding cell, bruised and furious. Ella, never one to take things seriously, kept joking about the whole ordeal. "We'll be out by Monday," she said. "No big deal." Carol wasn't so sure. When she was released on bail 2 days later, a stranger picked her up. It was Misty. At first, Carol was confused. Then she realized what was happening. Misty handed her a stack of documents, divorce filings, financial records, and a restraining order. Gary had beaten her to it. He hadn't just caught her. He had built a case while she played games. He'd spoken to lawyers, judges, and filed everything in advance, all while pretending to be the loyal, clueless husband. Misty made it clear. Gary wanted nothing more to do with her. His lawyer would contact hers. All future communication would be through legal channels. Her clothes were in the trunk, her car had gas, and her story, her betrayal, was now a matter of public record. Carol sat there in shock, realizing just how much she had underestimated him. Gary wasn't weak, he wasn't oblivious. He had watched, waited, and struck with precision. As Misty walked away, Carol asked the only question she could. "Why?" Misty turned once. "Because he loved you more than anyone, and you threw it away for a party with strangers." That was the moment Carol finally understood. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The fallout began before Carol even made it back to her parents' house in Ohio. By the time she arrived, news of the motel incident had spread across town. Small towns never needed a reason to gossip, but this was fuel. The local paper ran a vague police blotter listing the charges. Social media filled in the rest. Rumors swirled, names were shared, and people started making connections. Teachers, coaches, and small business owners were suddenly being looked at sideways. And in the middle of it all was Carol. Gary filed for divorce the next day. The documents included everything: witness statements, public records from Misty's lawsuit, and the police report. He didn't have to embellish anything. The facts were damaging enough. Carol's lawyer tried to negotiate quietly. She offered apologies, even a tearful voicemail, but Gary didn't respond. His only message came through his attorney. The marriage was over, and there would be no reconciliation. The judge moved quickly, aided by Carol's criminal record and Gary's carefully documented evidence. The house went to Gary. So did the majority of their assets. Carol was granted minimal alimony, 2 years, strictly monitored. Gary waived child support since both kids were grown, but he made one condition clear: Carol was not to involve their children in her side of the story. When the divorce was finalized, Gary handed over a sealed letter to each child. In it, he included proof: timestamps, photos, even a copy of the forged form Carol had submitted to the swingers group. He didn't speak ill of her. He didn't need to. He just let the truth speak for itself. Marianne, their daughter, called her mother once. It was a short call, then silence. Benny never called at all. Carol tried reaching out multiple times: letters, texts, voicemails, all unanswered. Her parents offered her a room, but she soon wore out her welcome. The embarrassment, the scandal, the fact that her own siblings wouldn't look her in the eye, it all added up. Back in town, Gary didn't celebrate. There was no victory lap, just quiet. He didn't date. He didn't post online. He didn't even speak much about what had happened. People respected that. Some neighbors tried to pry, but Gary kept it simple. It's all in the past now. But Misty became a regular part of his life. They weren't lovers, not yet, but their bond grew. They shared meals, helped with each other's homes, even attended a few social events together. People assumed they were dating, but when asked, both would say they were just friends. That changed one night when Misty confessed something. She'd been waiting for Gary to move on, but every time she saw him, she felt guilty, because she had already fallen for him. She didn't say it romantically. She said it like someone confessing a crime. And when Gary responded with a kiss, they both knew the line between grief and healing had finally been crossed. They didn't rush things. Gary was cautious, but for the first time in years, he felt peace. Real peace. The kind that came from honesty, not illusion. Carol, meanwhile, tried to rebuild. She found a job in a neighboring town, changed her phone number, and moved into a small rental unit. Ella, once her closest friend, disappeared. No calls, no updates. Rumor had it she moved out west. Others said she found another scene to latch onto. Carol sometimes ran into old acquaintances, but the looks they gave her said enough. She wasn't forgiven. She wasn't forgotten. The town had judged her, harshly, and while Gary never encouraged it, he also never defended her. She had destroyed her own reputation. The final blow came a year later. Gary and Misty returned to the same New Year's Eve party hosted by their old neighbors, Chris and Emily. This time, they walked in hand. Carol wasn't there, but word got back to her. Misty wore a blue dress that night, the same one she'd worn when she served Carol the divorce papers. It wasn't petty, it was symbolic. The message was clear. What was broken had been rebuilt. Not with vengeance, not with hate, but with patience and integrity. Gary, once the quiet, loyal husband who everyone overlooked, was now admired for how he'd handled everything, with dignity, with restraint, and with a clarity that few people in such situations ever manage. He didn't destroy Carol, he simply stopped protecting her. And in doing so, he gave himself and Misty a second chance. A year had passed since the fallout. In that time, Gary Thompson had rebuilt his life, not by moving quickly, but by moving deliberately. He didn't run from his pain, he faced it, sorted through every moment of betrayal, every lie, every missed sign, and then let it go. Misty was a big part of that process. She didn't rush him or fill the silence with false comfort. She just showed up, consistently, quietly, sincerely. They helped each other move forward without pretending the past didn't hurt. That honesty became the foundation for something real. They weren't in a rush to label anything, but as weeks became months, it became clear. This wasn't a rebound. This was a partnership. Equal, respectful, earned. Gary's kids slowly embraced Misty. Marianne was the first to visit them at Gary's house. She helped plant flowers in the backyard, asked Misty questions, and eventually said, "I get it now." Benny followed suit during Thanksgiving, giving Gary a firm handshake and Misty a smile that said more than words. No one had forgotten what Carol did, but no one talked about it anymore. Carol, on the other hand, had faded into near total obscurity. After her failed attempts to repair the damage with Gary and the kids, she kept her distance. Her legal issues lingered. The court-mandated fines, community service, and probation were just the surface. The real punishment came from the isolation. In a town where trust mattered, she had none left. People who once waved at her on Main Street now crossed the road. Even family events became tense. Her own niece's wedding had her seated at a table far from everyone else. No one said it aloud, but the message was clear. She was no longer welcome in polite circles. Ella reappeared briefly, but didn't stay long. She had no loyalty to anyone, not even herself. Rumor had it she moved to another town, repeating old habits with new faces. Carol heard from her only once, an unsolicited message suggesting they try again somewhere new. Carol didn't respond. Meanwhile, Gary and Misty continued growing, individually and together. Misty returned to part-time work at the library and picked up volunteer hours with a local women's shelter. Gary focused on finishing his restoration of the '67 Mustang, a project he'd once put on hold during his marriage. Now it became a symbol of focus, of progress, of doing something just for himself. On the next New Year's Eve, Gary did something no one expected. He got down on one knee. The room, Chris and Emily's living room, filled with friends, laughter, and second chances, fell quiet. Misty's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. Her answer was simple. Yes. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Gary only saw Misty. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about betrayal, heartbreak, or revenge. He was thinking about the future and who he wanted by his side. The ring wasn't extravagant. The moment wasn't staged, but it was real. That was all Gary ever wanted. Across the room, someone watched, uninvited, unacknowledged. Carol had slipped in just before midnight, unnoticed. She stood near the back alone. When Misty said yes, Carol didn't cry. She just lowered her head and quietly walked out. No one stopped her. The past was no longer hers to fix. Outside, the cold air hit her hard. She stood alone on the sidewalk, watching as fireworks lit up the sky. The celebration inside was muffled by the walls, but the joy was unmistakable. She had once been the center of Gary's world. Now she didn't even belong on the edges of it. Back inside, Gary and Misty shared a kiss. It wasn't dramatic or showy, just honest. The kind of kiss between two people who had been through hell and come out better, not bitter. Gary didn't need to get even. He didn't ruin Carol's life. She had done that herself. What he did was take control of his story. He didn't let betrayal define him. He made sure it had a consequence. And then he moved forward. This wasn't a story of revenge for the sake of pain. It was a story of boundaries, justice, and quiet strength. The guilty had faced consequences. The innocent had found healing. And the man who had once been blind to everything around him was now fully awake, choosing with clarity what came next.